So coming back to right where we left off after the Pioneer Trail, this is part 2 of the Armstrong Redwood State Natural Reserve. So this just shows some historical events that were happening during the life of this tree that fell. So it says that this one was about 1400 years old, and it just shows some events like the Aztec civilization and the Civil War here as markers in its age. Continuing along the Armstrong Trail, you're able to see some nice evidence of how these trees recover from wildfires, along with some evidence of past wildfires as charred trees. Since this area is on the outskirts of the main redwood forest, there is a hill on one side, and there aren't as many old growth redwoods here, but still plenty of nice younger redwoods. It is a place with less dense of a tree canopy, which allows more sunlight in for even better photo opportunities though. This is actually one of the most beautiful parts of the forest in my opinion, with the sunlight coming in through the trees and on the trail. The second notable tree you'll see along these trails is called Colonel Armstrong, and it's the oldest tree in the park at about 1400 years. It's also pretty tall at 308 feet and 14.6 feet diameter, but not totally as tall as the Parson Jones tree. Even though this particular area hasn't been affected by wildfires in a long time, you can still see some trees that have been hollowed out by past fires that you can see without even going off the trail. Even though the vast majority of these redwood trees will survive a wildfire, you can also see some new growth coming out of the bases of some of them that didn't do too well during the fires. Even most of the trees that did survive the fires perfectly fine still had a lot of new seedlings and new growth coming out near the base. This section along the Armstrong Trail especially also has a lot of Douglas firs mixed in with the redwoods, which again are easy to tell apart by the bark, which is much darker and less of a reddish tone than the redwoods themselves. Continuing along the trail, you'll come to the Redwood Forest Theater, which is an open-air outdoor theater which was built in the 1930s out of mostly wooden benches and is now open for limited use, such as the popular Old Grove Festival, which takes place in July every year. This theater actually had a lot of music events back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and it's definitely really cool to see today right in the middle of the old growth forest. The whole thing is mostly in the shade of the trees and is made up of hundreds of wooden benches right in a clearing in the forest. The trails don't continue after the theater, but I did turn back on the Armstrong Nature Trail and went back towards the Armstrong Woods Road to continue walking along the road for more views of the forest. After you're able to get back to it from these trails, walking along the road is again a great way to see more of the forest from the outside and has a great mix of views of some nice old growth areas as well as some new second growth areas. You can also see some old growth trees around this section that have trunks that have split into two just above the base, which forms what almost looks like two trees. You're able to get back onto the road for some nice views of the forest after a little bit more walking along this section of the trail. Throughout this area, as with the vast majority of the forest, most of the redwoods have recovered perfectly fine from the fires, but you can still see some smaller trees around the bases of them that haven't recovered so well. This is also another area with plenty of fairly old and tall Douglas firs mixed in along with the redwoods and in clearings. This was one of the least crowded areas and farther from the park entrance, so it's incredibly quiet and peaceful with only the sound of birds and occasional wind coming through the trees. This is also another cool area to see the impacts of the wildfires on the redwood trees, and as you can see, they've recovered perfectly fine and only have charred bases, and you can also see that the trail fence was replaced here because of wildfires. Once you finish walking back on the Armstrong Nature Trail and end up back at the entrance to the Pioneer Trail, you can exit out onto the Armstrong Woods Road for some nice different views on the way back. The first section of the road heading back still has a decent amount of old growth redwoods before you pass into a second growth area where most of the trees are only about 100 to a couple hundred years old. So that's the end of this video for now, and the end of my videos on the Armstrong Redwood State Natural Reserve. And if you enjoyed, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and feel free to comment if you'd like.